Did ASUS rip off a more generic capture card for their ASUS TUF CU4K30 that I reviewed so highly recently? That answer is a little complicated. Mostly no, but we should still talk about this one. We got another capture card. After my review of the ASUS TUF CU4K30 went live, one of the members of my Discord server noticed that it had an eerie resemblance to a capture card from Digitnow. In terms of specs, the design, it looked a little too similar to be a coincidence, and they were wondering if ASUS just cloned it. Now, for context and for clarification, I don't inherently consider that a bad thing. I've mentioned this a few times now, but many times in the kind of enthusiast electronics space, you will see companies make their first product in a specific category, and this is especially the case with capture products, where it's effectively a clone or a rebadge of something that has already been made, is already like a common product. Typically, capture card companies will often work with AverMedia to be the ODM or whatever for their specific capture card. That way they can get something to their consumers, find out what their actual like customer base wants and expects from them, and figure out their software chain and all of that, and then they'll spin up their own version of it. And in some cases, you just keep getting capture cards that are based on previous designs. For example, a lot of Elgato's capture cards are designed based on Yuan capture cards, but with new housing, custom drivers, unlocked features, modifications, yada yada. So I wouldn't consider it a bad thing if ASUS just did decide to use Digitnow's card for their first entry. They made a really good card. But digging into it, things got really interesting. So this is the Digitnow U601. It is listed as the 4K USB 3.0 capture card. It costs $130 to buy it brand new on Amazon, although there's currently like a $5 coupon. Physically, we're looking at a very similar design to the ASUS. We got this weird angular shape with the bumps on the top and the screws, although they're different screws. You got a logo on top, headset ports up front. So this one has a 4-pole. The ASUS has a 4-pole headset connector to do audio and microphone over the headset, and then a controller pass-through port, whereas the Digitnow just has a headphone and microphone port and no way to connect it to your controller, so you can't loop party chat through it or talk back to people on your console through this, which may be disappointing. On the back, you have 4 ports instead of 3, in that you have HDMI 2.0 pass-through, so HDMI in and out, and then you have USB 3.0, and this is another one of those cards that uses a Type A to A cable. Now, a lot of you in the comments have expressed that you actually enjoy this because that cable is more robust and reliable and less prone to breakage than a micro USB or USB Type C or whatever. I personally get annoyed because it's technically against the USB standard. You're not supposed to do it, and they always come with really short cables, and I just don't have any long cables for that. Maybe I just need to get over that and order one if I can find it and stop complaining about it, but I still don't like to see that. But then it does have USB Type-C for 5-volt DC input. I will say right off the bat, every time I tried plugging that in, just in case it tried to unlock features, which I'll talk about in a moment, it just turned off the card. So I guess if you're powering it on a laptop USB 2.0 port that can't give it enough power, it might work, but I had bad luck with it. Specs wise, we're looking at 4K 60 Hz pass-through, 1440p 144 Hz pass-through, and 1080p 240 Hz pass-through. That means you can play through the loop-through on this to your monitor in those formats. However, capture will only be in up to 4K 30, 1440p 60, or 1080p 120, which I tested and did mostly seem to sleep fine. This is all in NV12, so 420 color space, which is fine. I would love to see more, but for something like this, I wouldn't necessarily expect it. No HDR is supported in any capacity. So you don't have HDR pass-through, you don't have HDR tone mapping, none of that. Just HDR isn't detected. However, despite the fact that you can feed 1080p 240 and 1440p 120 and 144 Hz through this thing, the Xbox Series S I was playing on, hooked up to my 1440p 144 Hz monitor that I used for my PC test for this video, it would not detect 120 Hz support. I tried playing around with the settings, trying to rig it up, trick it, whatever. It does not think that this capture card can support 120 Hz, which is a little weird. My PC seemed to handle it no problem. All my console gameplay will just be 60 Hz pass-through. You are able to play in 1440p, 144 or 120 Hz and capture 1080p 120 Hz, which is pretty neat. I'll have some demos of that shown as well. Frame rate's not going to be perfect on these, as is often the case with these USB 3 cards. If you really want high refresh rate capture, like at high frame rates, then I would strongly recommend using a PCIe capture card like the Live Gamer 4K, Magewell's Elgato 4K 60 Pro Mark II. Those are going to be a lot more reliable for this. I frequently see duplicate frames on 120 Hz modes on these USB cards. The Asus one had a lot of issues with it until a firmware update, so that was cool, but it's often going to be the case. Latency wise, HDMI pass-through is real time. assume if I don't say anything about it or complain it, that is the case for all capture cards, but I'm trying to more verbally call that out just to reassure the comments that keep propping up about it. In terms of OBS preview latency, we're looking at 50 milliseconds, which is surprisingly fast. Solid there. I enjoy it. It's not, again, not the fastest, but it's up there in the completely suitable, glad to see it category, and I'm stoked to see more capture cards with this lower latency, especially over USB 3. Again, I've mentioned this a few times now. At some point over the winter or spring, I will be redoing all of my latency tests because I'm changing my methodology a bit, and I want to make sure I have the most accurate data possible. I will have a link in the description below to my website where I have a embedded table with all the updated data, and I will continue to keep that up to date, so you may see that all of that data changes and kind of refreshes at some point once I get that updated. And I guess I'll try to make a video about it as well, even if I don't have a good way to spin it, but very reasonably fast. You'll have no issues really syncing it up with your audio or microphone or anything like that. Speaking of microphone, I did go ahead and hook up my EPOS GSP601 gaming headset to the headphone and microphone port to play on the console and get a microphone test. I'm trying to do this for all of my headset reviews. I don't always make it, but try this out. It was not the best experience. This is a plug and play device. We'll talk about that in a moment, but that's not a headset with a volume control like the Sennheiser PC37X I used to have. And there is no, since this is a generic driverless capture card, they don't supply an audio controller app for it, and you have no control over the volume. So it is super loud in this headset, like unplayably loud. And I had to crank down the volume in Modern Warfare to super, super low. So it does have a pretty powerful headphone amp, I guess, because it was blowing out my GSP headset. But overall, the microphone sounded pretty good too. So here's some samples of that. So we gotta crank this volume down because it is way too loud. This is gonna be an audio test using the headset microphone plugged into the Digitnow capture card. I have no control over audio levels or volume or anything like that. Sit down. Ow, ow, ow. Why is it so loud? Sit down! Oh god, they're everywhere, they're everywhere, they're everywhere! Undo! I'm not the enemy. Bye! Bye! You just got knifed! Ow, ow, ow. Oh! Sit down! That's my hill. Unfortunately, what you would expect for something like this, but the microphone and HDMI audio do not show up as separate audio devices for OBS or anything like that. It's just one digital audio interface that shows up, and it's already pre-mixed. In terms of retro format support, this thing mostly plays nicely with your retro captures. It's going to be hit or miss though. I wouldn't buy it specifically for that purpose for sure. Retro or OSSC 2x through 5x, even with the Super Nintendo, seems to work perfectly in a sense of it actually captures it without artifacting or anything. But you have no real control over the scaling, so I kept ending up with like no signal or not supported if you have it set to the wrong resolution, specifically device default, which is hilarious. And then the default like embedded resolution for say 480p is 640 by 480 instead of 720 by 480, so you don't get to manually choose your resolutions, and it scales it kind of weird, so you may not have perfect scaling, or you'll have to apply aspect ratio adjustment filters or whatever. But I thought it looked pretty solid, especially at 5x, and the frame rate seems pretty stable. With the RetroTINK, you do get 480p support just fine. The 768p modes works as well. The 1080p modes work. The 1200p mode gives you nothing at all. Not even a no signal or not supported error. It just gives you a black screen. I tried manually typing in 1920 by 1200. I could not get anything out of it. And then the 1440p mode just gives you the like 4-box glitch issue, which a lot of these generic capture cards do. That is unfortunate. This capture card is a UVC capture card, which means it's plug and play. It worked on Mac, Windows, and Linux. Seems to work fine. No major issues to report there. Captured full 1440p, 4K30, all of that. So that was pretty cool to see. And it means it will show up as a faux webcam to show up in your video conferencing apps, your, Teams, Zoom, Discord, all of that, or the Windows 10 camera app. The last piece of the puzzle was to see if the ASUS TUF CU4K30 really was a clone of the Digitnow, to see if they're the same internals, because they both have the RGB light on the front and everything, so theoretically they could be the same internals. I will say the Digitnow is significantly heavier. Taking it apart, the Digitnow has 4 Allen key screws at the top that removes the top shell of the case, and you can expose it. The The ASUS one has these tiny little Torx screws, which are just kind of dummies. They don't actually go anywhere. Instead, under the rubber pads, you have Phillips head screws. Those 4 come out and reveal the insides. Now, the insides look drastically different overall. They have the same chip layout. You got the 3 main chips going on, and from what I can tell, it is hard to read the ones on the Digitnow because it has big old thermal pads that reach those chips and then touch the top of the aluminum chassis here, which the ASUS doesn't have. But those thermal pads have really kind of mucked up the surface of the chip. So it's hard to read the exact numbers, but from what I can tell, the main chips inside both of these are the exact same chips. But clearly the ASUS motherboard has a lot more going on here. And they're clearly doing a lot more with the specs of the card, and IMO doing a better job at it, especially with the added, controller pass-through and all of that. So obviously the ASUS card, in my opinion, is a much better card, and it's also Linux compatible, as I confirmed previously. But if you're looking for an alternative, want to support a different brand, whatever, they're very, very similar, even internally. So I just wanted to post up those photos and things like that. I'll have photos linked in the website post link below as well. Don't often get an opportunity to do that, but when I can easily disassemble and compare, pretty straightforward. Capture cards are great, but they won't make you a popular streamer, nor help you turn streaming into a business. I was just talking in a recent podcast about how I'm frustrated that so much of the content creator journey involves just relearning or reteaching things that most of us have gone through, with no real way of passing that along. The awesome people behind Streamer Square are here to change all of that with the launch of SolarStream, a new educational hub focused on all things streaming. SolarStream features 30 courses with more on the way, covering topics of all levels, from just getting started with streaming up to the cool important stuff like analytics, stream growth, and even taxes and other business objectives. If you're serious about streaming as a career or even a side job, or you just want to be the best you can be at it, don't get caught without a plan or a strategy. Sign up for SolarStream with the link in the video description and use the code EPOS for 10% off your first purchase. Is the Digitnow card worth $130? I'd say so. Within competition, you can obviously get better cards if you don't need specifically 120 FPS capture or 4K30 capture. Again, the EVGA XR1 Lite is still doing me away when you can get it for $60 or $65. It is, I was mistaken in that review, and that was still technically a sales price. I found out later, and so the price does bounce around from time to time, but they generally keep it on promotion for about $60 or $65, assuming it's available in your country. And if you can get it for that price, the value is just insane. And for most people, for streamer and content creators, that is more than good enough. But if you need 1440p support, that's where you start looking at the ASUS TUF and the Digitnow capture cards. And this one's a little bit cheaper, so if it gets you everything you need without controller support and stuff like that, go for it. The ASUS card also has HDR tone mapping, so keep that in mind as well. The choice is yours. Product links to all of them will be in the description below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe for more tech education and stream guides. I'm your stream professor, EposVox. And check out this other video on capture cards available for Linux if you're interested in more of that. Remember, be kind, rewind.